Okay, I hope you can see the screen. So this afternoon we are going to look at something called a Python tuple. Okay, now a tuple is like a list in that we can put in any kind of information which we want to put. The same thing we did with the list. The only thing with a tuple is that once you have created it, you are not allowed to change the values in your tuple. So it's a special list. Once you have created it, you're not allowed to change the values in the tuple. You are not allowed to delete any values. That's what it is. So it works the same way a list works, except with the limitations that you can't modify the values in a tuple by changing them or by deleting them. However, you can make it longer. Then whenever you don't want a tuple, you can delete it or you can change it into a list. So what we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to learn how to create tuples. Then we're also going to learn how to access values in a tuple using indexing and slicing. From what you have learned so far about indexing is that we can use indexing to access a single value from a list. The same way we do indexing with a list, we can also do the same thing with a tuple. Okay? Then with slicing allows us to access multiple values from a list, and we can also use the same slicing techniques to access multiple values from a tuple. Then we're also going to learn how to convert a list into a tuple. Usually when you're making a list, as we saw, you can change things, you can remove values, you can insert new values once you are happy with your list. And you say, okay, fine, this is going to be your final list. You can actually change that list into a tuple so that no modifications can be made on it. Okay? We are also going to see how to convert a tuple into a list. You have your tuple, fine, but maybe you want to remove one or two items from that list, from that tuple. So for you to do that, for you to remove an item or for you to modify an item which is in a tuple, you can't do it with a tuple. So the only thing you can do is you need to change that tuple into a list. Then once you change it into a list, then you can carry out those modifications. Once you're happy with the changes you've made, then you can change your list back into a tuple. Are we clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Then we're going to see how to find the length of a tuple. We saw how to do this with a list by using the length function. It happens that actually you can also use the length function with a tuple. Then you're also going to see how to repeat a tuple by multiplying it. You can multiply it by an integer so that it becomes larger or it repeats. And you're also going to see how to extend a tuple, how you make a tuple longer. Then also how to check for membership to a tuple by using the in keyword. That's what we used last time when we were checking for membership of a particular value in a list. So you say the value you're checking for in the list. So that way of doing things also works with the tuple. Then you're also going to see how to copy a tuple, and later on you're also going to see how to delete a tuple if you no longer need it. Are we clear? So let's get started with the definition of a tuple. So basically, a tuple is a collection of items. The only limitation, the difference between a tuple and a list is that you cannot change the items which are in a tuple. You're not allowed to change the items which are in that tuple. Python will not allow you. Okay, because changing items in a tuple is not allowed. You also are not allowed to delete items in a tuple. And we show that you've created a tuple by using these brackets, these parentheses. So using these parentheses, for a list we use square brackets, but for a tuple we use parentheses, and the values which you're going to store in a tuple are going to be separated by commas. Okay, so we're going to start with creating a tuple, but in this case we're going to start creating an empty tuple. So basically this is how you create an empty tuple. What has happened there? Looks like this thing ran a bit. So I need to, just a minute, get a new copy of this. Just a minute. Yeah, try. Okay, that's a good one. So we'll start with creating an empty tuple, which is a tuple without any values in it. It's empty. So how do you do that? You just put together, you type these two parentheses together, that's all. So that is like this. This is what an empty tuple looks like. If you get these two parentheses, then you give them to the type function. This is a type function. Then inside the type function, you give it these two parentheses. You ask Python what this is. Then Python tells you that it's a tuple. So when you have information enclosed, numbers or values enclosed in parentheses like that, what you have actually created is something called a tuple. So you can start with an empty tuple, like this case. So you can create an empty tuple, that's fine. But you can also create a tuple with only one element. The difference between a tuple and a list, when you create it with only one element, is that in a tuple, after the value you have stored in the tuple, if it's just one value you're storing, after that value, you have to put a comma. You see this comma?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that's how we store one value in a tuple. So after that value, you put a comma like that. Okay. Then if we get this tuple with one element, we give it to the type function. We ask it what it is we think we have created. Python tells us that it's a tuple. So that's a tuple with one value. So I've seen how to create a tuple, an empty tuple, a tuple without any values. So it's just two parentheses. Then if you create a tuple with one value, it's going to be the value. Then after the value, you put a comma. Then you can have a tuple with two elements. For example, items, the 10 and 20. So these two values are going to be separated by the comma. And that's what you type here. So parentheses 10, then comma 20. Like that. Then if you get this, you give it to the type function. You ask what it is you've created. Then Python tells you that you've created a tuple. Okay. You can actually store a bunch of numbers in a tuple like this. So you do that. Then you get these numbers 1, 3, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19. You put them inside type function. It tells you that that's a tuple. The other thing you notice is that it's also becoming cumbersome to type individual values and kind of like move them around. So the other thing you can do with a tuple is, which you also can do with a list, is that you can actually store your tuple in a variable so that it becomes more convenient to handle. And that's what you're going to do with this tuple which I've just created here. It turns out that these numbers are actually what are called prime numbers. So this tuple of prime numbers, we store it in a variable called prime numbers, like this. So the variable is the one on the left, then the value, what we want to store is the one thing on the right. So this assignment operation stores this tuple in the variable prime numbers like that. Then now we can print out our prime numbers like that. So we now have access to this tuple, but more conveniently through the variable prime numbers. Now if you give the variable prime numbers to the type function and we ask what kind of information is stored in prime numbers, Python tells us that it's a tuple. Is this clear? This is basically the same stuff we did with the list. Any questions so far?
Yes, it's clear, sir.
It's clear? Okay, so basically, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the same stuff we did with the list. Because a tuple is a special list. It's just that a tuple cannot be changed. Okay? So we move on next on how to access items from a tuple. Now, we saw how to access individual items from a list by using indexing and also by using slicing. When it comes to indexing, when you want to index, you need to start with the name of the list. That's what we did, followed by a bunch of square brackets. Then you put in the index or the position where the value you are looking for is. The same thing can be done with a tuple. So you start with the name of the tuple, followed by square brackets, then you put in the index. That index can, if you choose to begin counting your tuple from the beginning or from the end, you can either use positive indexing or negative indexing. If you need to access multiple values from that tuple, then in that case you need to use a slice. And how do we use a slice? We put a colon inside the square brackets we want to access. So in this case, we have our prime numbers here. Then we want to print the first item in the tuple prime numbers. So for us to print the first item in tuple prime numbers, we want to print, so we type the print function, we type print, then inside the parentheses of print, we give it the name of the tuple, which is prime numbers, then followed by square brackets, and inside these square brackets, we put in the index of the first item. We start counting, the indices start from 0, whether for a list or for a tuple. In Python, counting starts from 0. Are we clear? So like this, if we print that, we access the value 1. So for you to access an item, like we did with lists, you start with the name of the tuple, which is prime numbers, then followed by a pair of square brackets. Then inside these square brackets, you put in the index or the position of the item you want to access. With an index, you can only access one value. That's one thing to take note of. If you want to access the last item in the tuple prime numbers, of course, the last item, whatever it is always accessed using the index -1. So you say print, then inside the print function, inside the print function, you put in the name of the tuple, which is prime numbers, then inside the square brackets, the index, which is -1. So in this case, you want to access the last item in the tuple prime numbers, and that's 19, and that's exactly what you see here. So we have managed to access the first item. We have also managed to access the last item. So this indexing business is basically the same as for lists. The only difference is you have to put the name of the tuple instead of the name of the list. Are we clear?
Yes, sir.
Next, if you want to access more than one value, that's where we said you need to use a slice. So in this case, you want to access the third item all the way up to the 7th item. So third item has got index 2, then the 7th item has got index 6. But this is not going to give you, it's going to access from third all the way up to, but excluding the 7th item. So you're only going to go up to item 6. So when you use a slice like this, you will be able to access multiple values from that tuple. So you see, this is what we get. We have got our multiple values. The same way, when we slice a list, you get a small list in return. That's the same way it happens with a tuple. When you slice a tuple, what you get in return is a tuple, but a smaller tuple. Is that clear?
Very clear.
Okay. So, we have seen how to create a tuple, whether it's an empty tuple, a tuple with one value, a tuple with two values, a tuple with multiple values. Then we have also seen how to store a tuple in a variable, and then we have seen how to access values from a tuple using an index, whether it's positive index or a negative index, and slicing. I just admitted someone here. Okay, negative index and slicing. Oh, Monica, welcome. Unfortunately, I was not able to save your number on my phone. I don't know what's happening. So maybe I need to delete some things. But yeah, my phone is refusing to save your contacts. So I hope the other people have clearly they've shared links. Yeah, which is good. Okay. Can you see our screen?
Yes, I've received them today. Yes, I can.
Okay, so what we are talking about is something called a tuple, and I don't know if you can go back a bit, but yeah, I think it's possible. So here, basically a tuple is a collection of items which you can't change. So here we show how to create the so-called tuple by using only two parentheses like that. So that's how you create an empty tuple. Okay. Then if you ask Python, the type function, what it is you have with these two empty parentheses, then it tells you it's a tuple. You can also create a tuple which only has one value. However, that value, it can be a number, it can be a word, it can be anything. But if it's only one value, then after the value, you have to put a comma like that for a tuple with only one value, like that. Then we also showed how to create a tuple with two values. So in this case, 10 and 20. So those values are going to be separated by a comma like that. And we have also shown how to create a tuple with multiple values. So each of the values has to be separated from the other using a comma. Then we can actually store this list of values, or this tuple. It's not a list, it looks like a list, but it's a special list because it can't be modified. So we can actually store this tuple of values in a variable, and that's what we did here. So we stored it in a variable. We store it in a variable called prime numbers. Okay, we ran that. Then we printed prime numbers. You print prime numbers, and that's what you get. Then you can find out what kind of information is stored in prime numbers by giving the variable prime numbers to the function, the type function. When you do that, Python looks into this variable prime numbers. Then after looking at what's stored there, concludes that what's stored there is actually a tuple. We have talked about accessing values in a tuple. So basically, how you access values in a tuple depends on the position of an item in the tuple, and that position of an item is denoted by some numbers called an index, and that starts from 0. So the first item occupies a position of 0, the second item 1, third item 2, fourth item 3, fifth item 4, sixth item position 5, seventh item position 6, eighth item position 7, ninth item position 8. So you can actually access positions of items starting from this end going that way, but you start the count from 0 up to whatever the end is. You can also do the same thing by starting from this end going this side. When you start from this end going this side, you start with -1. So this is going to be -2, -3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, negative 7, negative 8, negative 9. So when you are using 0, 1, 2, 3 like that to access positions, that is what is called positive indexing. When you use negative numbers starting from the back, that's what's called negative indexing. So you can access an item, a single item, from a tuple by using square brackets. So you start with the name of the tuple followed by square brackets. Then inside these square brackets, you specify the position of the item you are interested in. In our case here, the position of the item we're interested in is the first item. So the first item has index 0, and that's why we've got a 0 here. So when you do that, when you run this, you get yourself 1. And if you want to print the last item in the tuple prime numbers, the last item, there are a couple of ways you can do that. Either you start from this side, but it's easier to start from this end because always the last item has got an index -1. So if you use -1, then you print, you get yourself 19. Then, so that's how you access a single value or a single item from a list. If you want to access multiple values from a list, then you use something called a slice. And a slice is denoted by this comma here. So what this does is, to the left of the slice, this 2, that 2 is the starting index. So you are saying you want to start by getting the value whose index is 2 all the way up to but less than 6. So index number 2, so here 0, 1, 2. So you want to start from here. You want to start with 3, then this is index 3, index 4, index 5. That is index 5. So these are the ones you want to get. But it says index 6. Index 6 is not included all the way up to but less than index 6. So that's how you end up with 3, 5, 7, and 11 as the numbers you've got, or as the items you've got from this tuple. So this is what is called a slice. Okay, and what you get in return is a smaller slice. So basically that's what we did. So the next thing we want to do is, since a tuple cannot be changed, it is sometimes necessary to change between a tuple and a list. One of the ways in which we get tuples is once you're happy with your list. If you are happy with your list and you don't want anyone to change it, then you can change that list into a tuple. And how you do that is by using a function called tuple. So here we create a list called numbers. So this is the name of the list, numbers, and this is a list itself. So this list has got values starting from 0 all the way up to 11. So we create that. So this list is stored in the variable numbers. Then we print out the variable numbers. So now that's the list numbers. This is what we get. Okay. Then we ask what kind of information is stored in numbers. So we get numbers, we give it to the type function. When you give it to the type function, then Python tells us that what we have is a list. Now, if you want to convert this list into a tuple, then you get this list numbers, then you give it to the function tuple. So in this case, tuple, then numbers. When you do that, Python does this. It shows you what numbers would look like as a tuple. Okay. Python shows you what numbers would look like as a tuple. Say, this is what numbers is going to look like as a tuple. If numbers is changed into a tuple, it would look like this. After doing this, after giving numbers to tuple, then Python shows you what numbers would look like as a tuple. If you print numbers, you find that numbers has not changed. So what actually happened? What happened was that when you gave these numbers, the list numbers, to the tuple function, the tuple function looked at the list numbers. Then after looking at it, it said, okay, fine, this is what I have, a list here, right? Then after that, it made a copy of that list. Then it changed the copy into a tuple, and that's a copy you were shown. So this thing which we're shown here is a copy of the list numbers which was changed into a tuple. That's why when we print numbers immediately after doing this, we print numbers, we find that numbers has not changed. The numbers itself, the list numbers itself, was never changed. When we gave it to tuple, the tuple function got the list numbers, looked at it, made a copy, then changed the copy into a tuple, then presented us the modified copy as a tuple. Are we clear? Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, since tuple does not actually modify the actual list, it actually just modifies the copy. Okay, what we need to do is that if we actually want to permanently change these list numbers into a tuple, when we do this, this bit tuple, then we give tuple numbers. When we give tuple numbers, tuple is going to look at numbers. Okay, fine, there's a list. Then it's going to make a copy of the list. Then need to modify the copy into a tuple. We need this result, tuple numbers. The result is this. That's the result. This right hand part of this thing here, the result is this. We know what the result is. So we need to store this back into numbers. Remember, numbers is a variable, so it can store whatever it is we tell it to do. So when we do this, we do this with an equal sign, one equal sign, and the numbers on the other hand, when we do that, we don't get anything. But then when we make a printout, now what we get is that number has been modified, permanently modified into a tuple. When you get these numbers, you give it to the type function, you see that numbers is now a tuple. So we started with a list, and now we have ended up with numbers, which is a tuple, by carrying out this operation here. Are we clear? Is it clear?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is how you modify a list into a tuple by using the tuple function. So the value of the list, you give it to the tuple function, then the tuple function does a magic, then you store it back. You store back the modified copy back into the variable. You can also modify, you can also convert a tuple into a list. So if you've got a tuple, then you want to get back a list. It is also possible for you to do that. And the way you do that is by using a function called list. So in our case here, we're going to print numbers. And right now, as you're going to see, numbers is a tuple. So the modification we made to numbers is still holding. It's still a tuple. You give these numbers to the type function, it will tell you that this thing is a tuple. Okay. So if we get these numbers, which is having a tuple inside it, we give it to a function called list. This list function, we give it to a function called list. List is going to do the same thing which tuple did. It's going to accept the numbers. It will look inside numbers. It will see, oh, I have a list, I have a tuple. So it will make a copy of the tuple, then it will modify the copy after modifying the copy, it's going to show us the modified copy as a list. The numbers itself, the tuple numbers itself, will remain modified, unmodified for the time being. So this is what we see. It's not that numbers itself has been modified. No. What was modified is a copy, because list makes a copy of the tuple, then that copy is modified into a list, and we are shown the result of the modification or the conversion. If we print numbers, there it is. So numbers is still a tuple. So if we want to permanently change numbers into a tuple, if we want to permanently change numbers into a tuple, then we need to do a similar operation we did with tuple. We know this bit, this list numbers, takes numbers, makes a copy of numbers, then modifies the copy tuple into a list. So we need to store back this modified copy back into numbers, and that's what we do. So this side, it gives us a modified list, then that modified list we need to store it back into numbers. So when you do that, then we print numbers. Now numbers is a list, like this. Numbers is a list. If we give these numbers now to the type function to find out what kind of information is stored there, then we see that now numbers has been successfully converted into a list. Is this clear?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So that's how you move between lists and tuples, by carrying out conversions. Okay. If you have a tuple, you can convert it into a list using the list function. If you have a list, you can convert your list into a tuple by using the tuple function. Okay. The other thing you can do, which you can also do with a list, is to find out how many items are in a tuple. So we print.
Just a minute, sir.
Yes.
Yes, someone Paul is waiting for someone to. I guess one.
Okay. Yeah. All right. We have admitted him. The other thing which we can do, which we did with the list, is to find out how many items, or what is the length of a tuple. In Python, the way you find out how many items are in something, or what the length of something is by using a function called length. This function called length, just like the function called lists and tuple and print, these come with Python. So everywhere where Python is installed, these functions are already there. They are what are called out of the box functions, or built-in functions. So these functions come with Python, and they do specific things to make your life a bit easy. So in the case of print, if we want to see what information is stored in a particular variable, we say print, then we give the print function the name of the variable. In this case is prime numbers, so we say print prime numbers, and this is what we see. So this is what prime numbers is. Then we want to get the length of prime numbers, or how many values are in prime numbers. So we say length, then inside length we put in the variable prime numbers. When you do this, when you run it, you get 9. So this tells you that prime numbers, the tuple prime numbers, has got 9 items. Are we clear? The tuple prime numbers has got 9 items. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The other thing I want you to pay attention to is look at length. Length, print. If you pay attention, length and print. Okay. No, it's fine. Okay. Then you can also repeat a tuple. By repeating a tuple, it means that you can multiply a tuple by some number. But the only kind of multiplication you can do is multiplying a tuple by an integer. You can't multiply a tuple by something which has got a decimal point. So in the case here, so the multiplication is done using the plus sign. So we saw the print function, the prime numbers. So I can say, let me just say something here. Say print the tuple prime numbers, then okay, prime numbers, then add a code cell, say print prime numbers, then I run this. Yeah, so this is our prime numbers, like this. These prime numbers, I can multiply it twice by multiplying it by 2. I can repeat it twice by doing a multiplication. So prime numbers times 2. When I do that, that's what I get. So I get this from here up to there, then from here up to there. So it's a repetition of the items in the tuple. Okay? You can also do the same thing. You can try to multiply by 3 or whatever it is. So I can say print tuple prime numbers, prime numbers, by 3. If I print prime numbers by 3, I can say print prime numbers times 3. If I do that, then I run it, the result is similar to what we have. So it's what the contents of prime numbers are multiplied 3 times. So I have the first part is that one, the second part is this one, the third part is this one. Then I would try to print prime numbers, multiply it by a number with a decimal point. We see what happens. Yeah. So print prime numbers, yeah, repeated thrice. Edit, say print tuple prime numbers, repeated. We'll try to say it 2.5 times. Let's see if you can repeat something 2.5 times. Click on code, so I'll say print prime numbers times 2.5. So I want you to repeat something 2.5 times. Can we do that? If you try to do that, you get an error. Python tells you, it brings out the red pen. Then you get an error, a type error, and you're told you can't multiply a tuple by a non-integer of type float. So when it comes to repeating things, you are not allowed to repeat things or multiply a list or a tuple by a number which is not an integer. Are we clear? You can only multiply a list by an integer. You can't multiply a list by a number which is not an integer. Is that clear?
Yes, that is.
Okay. This thing of multiplying by an integer and not multiplying by not multiplying by a number with a decimal point applies to both lists and tuples. Okay. Next, so deliberately I will keep on doing this also to deliberately show you what you can, what works and what doesn't work. Okay. The other thing is you can also check if a particular value is actually in a tuple. Okay, you can check if a particular value is in a tuple, and the way we check is by using what's known as an in keyword. So the way this works is that you start with a value you want to check for. So in this case, you want to check for the number 4. Then after the number 4, you write in, then prime number. So you're trying to tell Python, I want you to look for the number 4 in a tuple prime numbers. So if this value 4 is in this prime numbers, then Python is going to tell you true. If it's not in these prime numbers, then Python is going to tell you false. So in this case, when you do that, you get a false, that the value 4 is not in prime numbers. You can also check if the value 4 is not a member of that. So check if 4 is not a member of tuple prime numbers. 4 so-called close. And how do we do that? How do you check if 4 is not a member? It's by using another keyword called not. So you say 4 not in prime numbers. If 4 is not in prime numbers, then Python will tell you true. Like in this case, 4 not in prime numbers, we get a true. You can see something here about the color of in and not. Their colors are different. Okay? The color of in and not are different. The reason why the colors are different is because not and in have got special meaning in Python. Are we clear? So you cannot use in and not for any other purpose apart from the purpose which has been delegated to them in the language. Is this clear?
Yes, it is. Yes, sir.
I'll copy that. Then What have we done? Yeah. Okay. So here we check for 7. Check if 7 is a member of prime numbers. So we say 7 in prime numbers. So the value, this is how it works. This is how you check for if something is in a list or in a tuple. You put the value first, then followed by in, then the name of the list or the name of the tuple in which you want to look in. So in that case, 7 in prime numbers, true. So if the value is there, then Python will tell you, yeah, the value you're looking for, I have found it. Are we clear? Okay. Edit. Then here, I check for 7 not in prime number, not a member of tuple prime numbers. So here, 7 not in prime numbers. If you do this, you're trying to see if 7 is not in prime numbers. If you do that, what you get is a false, because Python looks into this thing, then it finds the value there, but you have said that 7 is not a member of prime numbers. Are we clear?
Yes, sir.
And this is basically what you're going to be doing. As well, these first few months, I'll show you how to do small things. By showing you how to do these small things with whether it's a list or a tuple or all these other things we're going to look at, hopefully at the end of the day, when we are done in 2 or 3 months' time, you should be able to put together, like you're trying to build a puzzle or something like that. You should be able to put together this information you have gathered over the past 3 months so that you can solve any problem. At least you might not be able to solve all the problems in the world, but some computer problems which we are going to present you with. Are we clear? So we'll show you bit by bit. How do you do this? How do you do that? How do you do this? How do you do that? Okay. Changing the value of an item in a tuple. Well, you cannot do this. And we are going to show you what happens when you try to change the value of an item in a tuple. The difference between a tuple and a list is that a tuple does not allow for its items to be changed or for its item to be removed. You can't remove a value from a tuple. You can't modify a value in a tuple. So basically, a tuple is one of those things which is called an object which is called immutable. It cannot mutate. Right now we have got the coronavirus, which keeps on changing, mutating every now and then. But in the case of a tuple does not mutate. It doesn't allow any of its items to be modified. We are going to try to modify some of these items and see what happens. So the last item, so we're going to access the last item in a tuple, prime numbers, and this is how we do it. So print the last items of prime numbers, that's a tuple. Then after that, the square brackets, then we'll put in the index of the last item, which is -1. So we try to access the last item in that tuple. And the last item is 19. Okay. So we try to change the value of the last item from 19 to 43, which is also a prime number. So we're not really doing a lot of sin. So prime numbers, that's the name of the tuple, then square brackets, in the index, the position where we want to change, then followed by an equal sign and the value we want to put at that particular position. When we try to do this with a tuple, Python refuses, and it tells us that there's something wrong with this line we have written. And the reason is because here something called a type error has occurred, and Python offers a bit of explanation. It says tuple object does not support item assignment. So in a tuple, you are not allowed to modify the values which are there and give them new values. The positions in a tuple, you are not allowed to give them new values or to assign them new values. If you try to delete an item which is in a tuple, that's what you're going to try to do also. So again, deleting items in a tuple is not allowed. So we access the first item in a tuple, prime numbers. So the first item is 1. Then we try to delete using the delete function, because if you want to delete something, use the delete function. Okay. So we try to delete the first item in a tuple. And how do we do that? We type delete, D-E-L, then inside this delete, we put in the name of the tuple, that's prime numbers, and after that we put in the position in the square brackets, we put in the index of the item we want to delete. So in this case, we want to delete the first item. When we do this, Python again comes out with a red pen and says there's something wrong with this. And it spits out some information in this thing called a traceback. It says that there's something called a type error has occurred. And if you look closely, it even points at what line it has a mistake with, it has a problem with, and they offered an explanation of what it is that has gone wrong. So here it says tuple objects doesn't support item deletion. So that is the difference with the tuple. Apart from it having parentheses instead of square brackets, a tuple does not allow you to delete any items from it. A tuple does not allow you to modify items which are in a tuple. With a list, we saw that you could delete using the position of an item using the delete function. You could also do a pop using the position of an item. You could also delete an item using the value by using the remove method. That's what we saw with a list. But with a tuple, these operations of deleting or modifying values in a tuple are not allowed. Are we clear? Are we clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. However, one thing you can do is that you can make a tuple longer. For example, we repeated the tuple by multiplying. Okay? When you multiply the tuple by 2 times 3, basically what you are doing is you are repeating the values which are in a tuple. But what we mean is that we can actually add new values to a tuple. We can extend a tuple. Okay? So here we print the tuple prime numbers and we see what values it has. Here it is. These are the current values or items which are in this tuple prime numbers: 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, and 19. You can add these prime numbers with another tuple using the plus sign. So it's very easy. You can use a plus sign. Then after that, you add some other values like that. When you do that, this is what you get. You get a longer tuple with the values from prime numbers and the values from this other tuple which doesn't have a name. So it's actually possible for you to add tuples together. Okay. However, as you're going to see, I will print the prime numbers. I'll say print the tuple, print tuple, prime numbers. when I print the tuple prime numbers, no. The prime numbers has not been modified. So what happened? When we carried out this operation, if the prime numbers is still unmodified, when we carried out this operation, the addition operation here, so what actually happened is that Python made a copy of these prime numbers, then it also made a copy of these. Then these two copies, it added them into a new tuple, and that's what we're shown here. So if we want to actually permanently extend these prime numbers, we need to store this copy, this modified tuple, the extended one. We need to store it back into prime numbers. Are we clear? If we want our extended tuple, which is what you have been shown here, when you say prime numbers plus this, we get this extended tuple. We need to store this extended tuple back in prime numbers. This bit here is what produces the extended tuple. Then we need to store it back into prime numbers. Like that. So this is what we do here. Then now when we print prime numbers, this is what we get. We get an extended tuple. The only problem here is you can't do anything with this tuple. You can't modify anything. You can't delete anything. If that's what you want to do, then you need to change this tuple back into a list. Once you change it back into a list, then you can carry out your modifications or you can carry out your deletions. Are we clear?
I'm confused, sir, on that one. Where you are saying you can't modify, but here we are extending a tuple, which means we are adding like
you are allowed to extend the tuple. You are allowed to make it longer. You are allowed to make a tuple longer. We made it longer when we multiplied by 2 and by 3. You are allowed to make a tuple longer. The only thing you're not allowed to do is you can't change the values in a tuple. And you cannot delete values which are in a tuple. But making it longer, you're allowed to make it longer. That's the only thing you're allowed to do. You can make it longer, but you can't make it shorter.
Okay.
Yes, and you can't define the values inside. Are we clear? Okay. You can also make a copy of a tuple. And how do you make a copy of a tuple? Is just by using an equal sign, like that. When we looked at the list, for us to make a proper copy of a list, we had to use a slice. In the case of a tuple, it's not necessary for you to use a slice. So if we do this, copy the list of prime numbers, then we say copy prime numbers, there. Then after that, you print this, copy prime numbers. That's what it is. The problem here is that's the only thing you can do. You can't delete anything from copy prime numbers. You can't change anything from copy prime numbers. But I think you can make it longer. I'm not sure exactly what happens, but let me try. Try to extend copy prime numbers. So you're going to say copy prime numbers. So we see exactly what happens. So we say copy prime numbers plus, we add one more value, 43. Then we print copy. The other thing is, don't be afraid to try out things. your computer is not going to die. I also try to print prime numbers. I want to see if these copies are kind of like copies or they are the same stuff. Okay, so it looks like copy prime numbers and prime numbers are two different tuples now, because prime numbers only goes up to 37. Then we added something to copy prime numbers. We added 43, right? Then copy prime numbers now goes up to 43. So these are two different they're two different tuples. So when you make a copy, what you get is actually a different tuple from the one you copied from. Are we clear?
Yes, we
Okay. Next, the other thing you can do, since you cannot remove a value from a tuple, or you can't delete an item from a tuple, the other thing you can do with a tuple is you can actually delete the tuple. The whole tuple, you can delete it. So in this case, we print our prime numbers, then you can delete the whole copy prime numbers. These tuple copy prime numbers. You can just say delete copy prime numbers. If you no longer need that particular tuple, then you can delete it. When you try to print it, Python will tell you there's a problem. Name error. Name copy prime numbers is not defined. The reason why it's not defined is trying to tell you, I have failed to find these copy prime numbers. It's because you've deleted it. So you can actually delete the whole tuple. What you're not allowed to do is to delete an item or to modify an item in a tuple. If you no longer need a tuple, you've got no use for it anymore, you can actually delete it by using the delete function. If you print prime numbers, there. Is that clear? Okay, so you might have come up with your own lists. Okay, you come up with a list, then you're happy. Okay, fine, this is a good list. Then you might have more than one list. Then after having this more than one list, you want to combine these lists together. For example, as you can see, I create a list called provinces, and in this list called provinces, I store in this list what I think are the provinces we currently have at the moment. Of course, it can change, but if I think it's not going to change, that's fine. So I create this list of provinces. Then I print it. Okay, so this is the list I have. Southern, Western, Lusaka, Central, Northwestern, Copperbelt, Eastern, Machinga, Northern, Wapula. That's fine. I also create another list of what are the provincial headquarters of these provinces. So that's Choma, Mongo, Lusaka, Kabwe, Solwezi, Ndola, Chipata, Mpika, Kasama, Mansa. So I create this. Then I print it. Now these two lists, the one for provinces and the one for provincial headquarters, are related. Okay? So if I want to put these two lists together, very clear, if I want to put these two lists together, I can carry out an operation called zipping, like the way your zipper works. If you have got a zip, it takes one part of your left part of your shirt and your right part of your shirt, then it puts them together. I can actually zip these two lists using a function called zip. So I say zip, then to this function called zip, I give it provinces, then I also give it a list of provincial headquarters. Then I run that, whatever is zipped, when it zips the provinces and provincial headquarters, I'm going to store whatever has been zipped in a variable called zipped. Then I find out what zipped is. It says, it's a zip. Okay. Now, you can't really see what a zip is, because if we try to print a zipped, we won't see much. If we try to print zipped, yeah, Python is just going to tell us, oh, we created something called a zip object located at this particular location in our computer. So we can't see it, we can't print it. For us to see this zipped object, we need to change the zipped into a list. And how do we change anything into a list? By using a function called list. We have seen this function list. So the zipped object we created, by when we put together, when we zipped provinces and provincial headquarters, we created a zipped object. We give this zipped object to lists, then it's going to produce a zipped list. When it produces a zipped list, what we're actually going to see is that then we print this zipped list. This is what we're going to get. So we get a list, but this list is different now. Inside this list, you see these. Southern has been zipped together with Choma. Western has been zipped together with Mongo. Lusaka has been zipped together with Lusaka. Central has been zipped together with Kawe. Northwestern has been zipped with Solwezi. Copperbelt has been zipped with Ndola. Chipata, Eastern has been zipped with Chipata. Mchinga has been zipped with Mpika. Northern has been zipped with Kasama. Luapula has been zipped with Mansa. This is what is called zipping in Python. So if you have a list, 2 lists or 3 lists which contain related information, okay, you can actually zip them. Then if you want to see the things, that's what you get. So you get a list, but inside here, what you are seeing here, this is a tuple. So the zipping uses tuples. So this is another specific way in which a tuple is used. These zipped things can't be modified. Okay. This other thing here, unpacking a tuple. Okay, so here I create a tuple of something which cannot be changed. In the case, it's our presidents. The first one was Kenneth Kaunda, then we had Frederick Chiluba, then we had Levi Mwanawasa, then we had Rupia Banda, then we had Michael Sata, and Edgar Lungu. This thing is not going to change. So if you have got information which is not going to be modified, you better store it as a tuple. If you print that, you have a tuple of presidents. Then if you ask Python what it is you think you have, by giving presidents to type, it tells you it's a tuple. You can, of course, you can get the length. How many presidents have we had so far? Then it tells you about 6. Then you can carry out another operation called unpacking. Okay? Now, when you are unpacking, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the values which are stored in a tuple, then you're trying to store them in separate variables. These values, Kenneth Kaunda, this was the first guy, first president. Frederick Chiluba, second president. Levi Mwanawasa, third. Rupia Banda, fourth. Michael Sata, fifth. Edgar Lungu is now the 6th guy. So you can, if you try to store the values stored in a tuple, then you want to store these values in separate variables. That process is what is called unpacking. So you start with the first variable, this variable first. That's the first variable, the second variable, the third variable, the 4th variable, 5th, 6th variable. Then all these variables, this one is going to store Kaunda, the second one is going to store Chiluba, the third one is going to store Levi Mwanawasa, the 4th one is going to store Rupia Banda, the 5th one is going to store Michael Sata, the 6th one is going to store Edgar Lungu. So these variables, you put an equal sign, then you put the tuple this side. So the number of items in the tuple need to match the number of variables you put on the left hand side. When you do this, then you run it. The values in the variable president are going to be unpacked in each of these 6 variables, such that when you print first, what you're going to get is Kaunda, Kenneth Kaunda. When you print second, what you're going to get is Frederick Chiluba. When you print out third, what you're going to get is Levi Manawasa. Fourth, what you get is Rupiah Banda. Fifth, what you're going to get is Michael Sata. And sixth, what you're going to get is Edgar Lungu. So this is how you extract, another way of quickly extracting information from your tuple. Are there any questions? We have to come to an end here. So this process is called unpacking. We have seen how to do unpacking. We have also seen how to do zipping. How do you zip lists? Related lists together. Any question?
No question from my side.
Okay. If there are no questions, we'll have to end here. The video recording is going to be posted to YouTube, and the link is going to be shared in Moodle. Okay. So those of you who have got access to Moodle, you'll be able to see the link in Moodle. If you do not have access to Moodle, then you can just go straight to YouTube under my channel, then you'll be able to rewatch the video. So our next class is going to be on Monday, where we're going to talk about something called Python sets. So we have looked at Python lists, Python tuples. On Monday, we're going to look at something called Python sets. The same set which you do in mathematics, the mathematical sets. There is something which works like that in Python. So you're going to see it when you meet on Monday. So have a good weekend. We have to come to an end here.